There is a person or something that built the most important financial system of the 21st century. They have never been photographed, never been identified, never spent a single penny of their $100 billion fortune. And in April 2011, they sent one final email, typed 3 sentences, and disappeared from the face of the earth. January 3rd, 2009, 6:15 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. A line of text is written into the foundation of a parallel monetary system. Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. It is the front page headline of that morning's London Times, and it is now embedded permanently, immutably, on every node on Earth into the first block of a network that is worth $1.618 trillion today. And a growing number of serious people, academics at Oxford and Berkeley, Islamic scholars across the Gulf, the most influential figures in modern finance believe Satoshi Nakamoto was not, in any normal sense of the word, human. There are over 4,000 religions on this planet. Some people find theirs in a church, some find it in a stadium on a Sunday afternoon, and some find it in a movie. There are people who genuinely believe The Matrix is a documentary. Some people, increasingly, find it in Bitcoin. Now, I know what you're thinking. What a load of nonsense. And that was my initial reaction too. Bitcoin is a financial asset. It's code. It's a network. It's a hedge against inflation. It is not a religion. But was I actually right about that? If so, why are peer-reviewed academics at Berkeley and Oxford publishing papers arguing that in fact it is a religion? Why does Max Keiser, one of the most influential voices in crypto, say on television with a straight face that Satoshi Nakamoto is the second coming of Jesus? Why are the parallels between the story of Christianity and the story of Bitcoin so uncanny that it stops being funny somewhere around the third disciple? And then there's an even bigger question. What if understanding why Bitcoin is a religion is not just a curiosity, but the key to understanding the price? Because the market cap, the institutional adoption, the willingness of sovereign nations to hold Bitcoin while ignoring most other crypto assets, none of that is explained by the technology. It is, however, explained by what the technology means to the people who hold it. Now, let me be clear on this, you absolutely don't have to believe any of this by the end of the video, but I promise I researched this topic to the best of my ability so you can at least understand why some people claim that Satoshi is the second coming of Jesus, an alien, or a time traveler. I'm DC and you're watching The Coin Bureau. Now let's start with Jesus. And to understand how Bitcoin became a religion, we have to begin with the people who actually study religion. In February of this year, Timothy Ahn, a sociologist at UC Berkeley, published a paper in Oxford Socio-Economic Review titled "Fix the Money, Fix the World, Bitcoin as a Techno-Libertarian Religion." Ahn isn't a Bitcoiner. He's an academic and applying classical Durkheimian sociology, the same framework used to analyze early Christianity, Islam, and modern American evangelicalism. He argues that Bitcoin functions as a moral community organized around one shared sacred symbol. That symbol is salvation. Salvation from a failing financial order. And he isn't the first to make this case. Joseph Laycock, a religious studies professor at Texas State, wrote earlier this year that Bloomberg had already called Bitcoin the first true religion of the 21st century. There was an organization founded in 2017 that calls itself the Church of Bitcoin, and their founding documents name Satoshi Nakamoto as a prophet. In Texas, there are billboards along the highway that read "Crypto is real" in the exact font, the exact layout of the Jesus billboards besides them. And before you dismiss any of this, understand that the people calling Bitcoin a religion include the people who built Bitcoin. The community itself uses this language. They talk about being orange-pilled, a conversion experience. They cast out heretics with the phrase, "have fun staying poor." They make pilgrimages to Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador, to the Miami conferences, to annual revivals. It has scripture in the form of a 9-page white paper, and it has a clergy, Max Keiser as the high priest, Adam Back as the elder scholar, and Michael Saylor as Saul on the road to Damascus. Once you accept that the religion frame isn't a metaphor, once you accept that this is how the community actually describes itself, you can apply the same 4-part test that scholars use to identify any religion. A Messiah, disciples, prophecies, and a promised return. Bitcoin has every single one of them. And while the decorations are interesting, the structure underneath is something else entirely. The thing is, you can only see that structure when you look at the men who walked next to the Messiah. Now pay attention here because the biblical parallels in early Bitcoin history are not forced, they are uncanny. Let's start with Adam Back, John the Baptist. In 1997, more than a decade before Bitcoin existed, Adam Back invented something called Hashcash, a proof-of-work system originally designed to fight email spam. It was the engine that Satoshi would later use as the basis for Bitcoin mining. Hashcash is cited by name in the Bitcoin whitepaper. And on August 20th, 2008, roughly 10 weeks before Satoshi published anything publicly, Adam Back received an email from a stranger. The stranger asked permission to cite his work in an upcoming paper on electronic cash. That email is the first contact Satoshi Nakamoto ever made with another human being on this planet. In the Gospel of John, the Baptist sees Jesus approaching the Jordan and says, "I am the voice of the one crying in the wilderness. After me comes a man who ranks before me because he was before me. I baptize with water, but among you stands one you do not know." Staying ahead of these structural red flags before they translate into devastating losses is exactly why the Coin Bureau Telegram channel exists. This is where we share the latest breaking news the moment it lands, where we provide deep dive alpha on emerging risks across DeFi protocols, exchanges, and stablecoin issuers, and where we deliver the most important market updates straight to your device so you never miss a critical signal. You can sign up today using the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code currently displayed on your screen. When the priests come to ask him directly, "Are you the Christ?" John answers in 3 words, "I am not." When the New York Times investigated Adam Back in April of this year, he responded on X with 3 words, "I'm not Satoshi." The forerunner who built the tools, the man cited by name in scripture, the one who insists again and again that he is not the one. The more he denies it, the more the structure confirms itself. Then we have Wei Dai, the Old Testament prophet. In 1998, Dai published a proposal he called B-Money, an anonymous, decentralized electronic cash system. Most of the conceptual scaffolding that would later become Bitcoin. Satoshi cited him, emailed him before publication. Wei Dai never spoke publicly about Bitcoin, never claimed authorship, and faded into the background. A prophet whose words were recorded and whose person disappeared. In Isaiah 53, written some 700 years before the birth of Christ, the prophet writes, "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him." The prophets are remembered through their texts, not their faces, not their lives. Ethereum later named its smallest unit, the Wei, after him, a form of canonization, the forerunner's name written into the liturgy of a different church. And of course, there's Hal Finney, the beloved disciple. On January 11th, 2009, 8 days after the Bitcoin network went live, Hal Finney downloaded the software and posted a message to Twitter. 2 words, "Running Bitcoin." The next day, Satoshi sent him the first Bitcoin transaction in history, 10 BTC. From the Messiah to the disciple. Finney had spent his entire career as a cryptographer. In 2004, he had built something called RPOW, reusable proofs of work, a direct conceptual ancestor of Bitcoin's consensus mechanism. He was ready for this. He had been ready for years. And then in the very same year Bitcoin launched, Hal was diagnosed with ALS. He kept coding from his wheelchair. As the disease progressed, as it took his hands, then his voice, then his ability to move at all, he communicated through eye movements. His final Bitcoin talk post was titled "Bitcoin and Me." The community treats this as a dying testament, a sacred text. Hal Finney died on August 28, 2014. His body was cryogenically preserved by the Alcohol Life Extension Foundation in Scottsdale, Arizona. In the Gospel of John, chapter 11, Jesus stands at the tomb of his friend Lazarus and weeps. Then he commands the stone rolled away. Then he calls into the cave, "Lazarus, come forth." And the dead man walks out. The first apostle of Bitcoin, baptized by the first transaction, martyred by ALS, frozen in time, waiting for a future that the very thing he helped build is helping to fund. There are believers who will tell you with no irony in their voice that one day Hal Finney will be brought back. Then we have Thomas the Doubter. That's Nick Szabo. In 1998, Szabo published a proposal he called BitGold, a decentralized proof-of-work-based digital asset with a fixed supply. Bitcoin is essentially BitGold with the double spend problem solved. Stylometric analysis, the linguistic studies that compare writing patterns, keep flagging Szabo as the closest match to Satoshi's prose. He has denied authorship repeatedly, publicly, explicitly for over a decade. In the Gospel of John, chapter 20, the apostles tell Thomas that the risen Christ has appeared to them. Thomas refuses to believe. "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." 8 days later, Christ appears again and addresses Thomas directly. "Do not disbelieve, but believe." Nick Szabo is the doubting Thomas of Bitcoin, the apostle whose entire identity is defined by his refusal to confirm a truth that everyone around him already believes. Every denial generates more suspicion. Gavin Andresen, Peter, holder of the keys. Around 2010, Satoshi met Andresen on the Bitcoin Talk forum and made him lead developer of the project. Then Satoshi gave him the Bitcoin Alert Key, the single cryptographic key capable of broadcasting an emergency message to every node on the network. He gave him commit access to the code repository, the literal administrative keys to the kingdom. In Matthew 16:19, Christ turns to Peter and says, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven." And so in April 2011, Satoshi sent Andresen a final email, the last message anyone has ever received from him. "I've moved on to other things. It's in good hands with Gavin and everyone." Then he vanished. The keys handed to a disciple before the Messiah ascended. There is one more parallel here, and it's darker. In 2016, Gavin Andresen publicly endorsed Craig Wright as Satoshi Nakamoto. He was wrong. The community revoked his commit access within days. The first pope of Bitcoin was excommunicated by his own church. And even Peter denied Christ 3 entire times. Which brings us to Craig Wright, the false Messiah. Now, every religion eventually produces a false messiah, and Bitcoin's is Craig Wright. Beginning in 2016, Wright publicly claimed to be Satoshi Nakamoto. He pursued the claim through lawsuits and copyright filings for nearly a decade. In March 2024, a UK High Court ruled that Wright was not Satoshi and that he had committed fraud and perjury in pursuing the claim. Now, the interesting thing isn't that Wright was unconvincing, it's that the structure produced him at all. Once a religion has scripture, prophecy, disciples, and an absent founder, a false claimant becomes almost inevitable. His rejection by the community is itself an act of faith, a declaration that the real Satoshi is still out there, still unfound. The false messiah always reinforces the true one. Max Keiser, Paul the Evangelist, the high priest who came late, former Wall Street trader, now senior advisor to President Bukele in El Salvador, the first head of state to make Bitcoin legal tender. Keiser did not walk with the Messiah. He converted afterward and became the loudest preacher the religion has ever produced. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, writes, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes." Keiser calls Bitcoin God's money on television. He has on multiple occasions suggested Satoshi is the second coming of Christ. Now, whatever you think of him personally, he is the most effective evangelist this religion has ever produced. And lastly, we have Michael Saylor, Saul on the road to Damascus. This is the parallel that ends the chapter because it is the most exact. On December 19th, 2013, Michael Saylor posted on Twitter that Bitcoin's days were numbered. He compared it to online gambling. He said it would suffer the same fate. In Act 7, before his conversion, Saul of Tarsus stands and approves the stoning of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. He holds the coats of the men throwing the stones. He persecutes the early church with a religious zeal of his own. 7 years after that tweet, August 20th, Saylor's company MicroStrategy converted $250 million of corporate cash into Bitcoin. He has not stopped buying since, and his company now holds over 840,000 BTC. In Acts 9, Saul is struck down by the road to Damascus by a blinding light. A voice asks him, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He converts. He is renamed Paul. He becomes the missionary who carries the gospel to the Roman Empire, the man who, more than anyone else, transforms a small Jewish sect into a world religion. Saylor's conversion is documented. He has described it publicly, repeatedly in interview after interview. The persecutor who became the buyer. The man who once mocked Bitcoin is now the single largest corporate evangelist for it on earth. Now, here's the part where the whole structure clicks into place. Every one of these men has been investigated as a potential Satoshi candidate. The journalists have done their work, the public, Bitcoin maxis, and social media have done theirs. And every one of them has been ruled out. Not by denial, but by the structure itself. You don't cite yourself in the third person. You don't email yourself for citation permission. You don't bury your own work in your own scripture. You don't hand yourself the keys and send yourself a goodbye. They couldn't be Satoshi because they were the disciples. Now, religions do not survive on the strength of their founders alone. They survive because of the signs that come after, the prophecies fulfilled, the sacrifices made, the miracles that the believers can point to as evidence of the founder's true nature. And Bitcoin has 6 of them. The first, October 31st, 2008, Halloween, 6 weeks after Lehman Brothers collapsed and took roughly $10 trillion of global wealth with it. The world's financial system is actively on fire. Central banks are improvising trillion-dollar bailouts in real time. On that day, that specific day, a stranger with no verifiable identity uploads a 9-page PDF to an obscure cryptography mailing list. Nobody has heard of him. Nobody has heard of Bitcoin. The timing is not coincidental. The timing is surgical. 3 months later, January 3rd, 2009, at 6:15 UTC, the first block of Bitcoin is mined. And carved into that very first block, immutably, forever, on every node on Earth, is that morning's front page headline from the London Times. Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. 9 days later, the Chancellor executed the bailout exactly as this headline predicted. Bitcoin was time-stamped to the moment the old system was visibly failing. It came into the world holding a newspaper as evidence, as accusation, as a prophecy. The second, Bitcoin supply is cut in half every 210,000 blocks, roughly every 4 years, on a schedule programmed to run until the year 2140. Now, that is a 131-year monetary policy set in stone, written by an entity who then walked away from the project within 18 months of launching it. No human institution has ever set a 131-year monetary policy and then left the building. The Fed was established in 1913 and has changed its mandate multiple times since then. The Bank of England has rewritten its operating principles repeatedly across 3 centuries. Satoshi wrote the rules once and never touched them again. The third, in September 2021, El Salvador became the first country in history to make Bitcoin legal tender. In March 2025, President Donald Trump signed an executive order creating a US strategic Bitcoin reserve. The United States government now holds over 328,000 Bitcoin in a federal vault. A piece of software written by an anonymous stranger in 2008, published on a mailing list nobody read, is now a strategic asset of the largest superpower in the world. The fourth, in January 2024, the SEC approved spot Bitcoin ETFs. As of last week, those ETFs hold over $101 billion in assets under management. BlackRock's IBIT fund alone holds $66 billion. It reached $80 billion in assets faster than any ETF in the history of the financial industry. The world's largest asset manager, Larry Fink, who once called crypto an index of money laundering, is now the single largest non-Satoshi holder of Bitcoin on the planet. The persecutor became the buyer once again. The fifth, Satoshi disappeared in April 2011 before Bitcoin became politically significant enough to attract serious government attention, before the regulatory environment had any reason to look for him, before the dollar value of his holdings became large enough to make him a target. He timed his departure with the same precision he timed his arrival. And number 6, the ultimate one, Satoshi mined approximately 1.1 million Bitcoin in the first year of the network. The cryptographer Sergio Lerner mapped this, identifying a unique fingerprint in the mining rhythm of the early blocks, called the Satoshi pattern. At current valuations, that holding is worth somewhere between $80 and $120 billion. It has never moved, not one Satoshi spent, for 16 years. A man who could have been one of the 10 wealthiest people on Earth has refused for 16 consecutive years to touch his own fortune. Leaving $100 billion untouched is not a financial decision. It is, however, an act of faith. Okay, the big one. You came for the alien theory, and I'm not going to insult your intelligence. There are people, smart people, technically literate people, who genuinely believe Satoshi was an extraterrestrial or a man from the future. Now, I'm not here to mock them. The entire idea is to figure out how they came to this conclusion to begin with. So let's try to break it down, because the mundane explanations simply stop working. Let me show you why. Now, besides aliens and a man from the future, what the broader community of cryptographers, economists, and the people who have spent the longest time looking at this problem are saying is something simpler, and possibly even stranger. Most of what Satoshi proposed in 2008 was dismissed by the conventional wisdom of the time. He was laughed at on the cryptography mailing list where he posted the white paper. We very, very much need such a system, one prominent cryptographer wrote in reply, but the way I understand your proposal, it does not seem to scale to the required size. Another, James Donald, wrote, you will not find a solution to political problems in cryptography. Now, these were not stupid people. They were the leading cryptographers on Earth, and they were wrong about almost every objection they raised. Here we are, 16 years later, and what Satoshi got right is inexplicable. He predicted institutional adoption. In a 2010 forum post, he wrote that the network would eventually need to be held by banks and exchanges that hold reserves of Bitcoin. The ETF approval in 2024 was the literal fulfillment of that sentence. He predicted nation-state adoption. In multiple forum posts, he discussed how governments would eventually be unable to ignore the network. El Salvador in 2021, the United States in 2025. He predicted the energy migration. In December 2010, in a thread on mining, he wrote that hash power would naturally concentrate wherever electricity was cheapest, that Bitcoin would become a global market for standard energy. Today, Bitcoin mining is the largest single buyer of flared natural gas in North America and is being integrated with nuclear baseload by multiple sovereign energy programs. He predicted the block size war. In 2010, when he was asked about scaling, he wrote that the network would eventually face a debate about block size and that this debate would be social, not technical. In 2017, the network split exactly along those lines, producing Bitcoin Cash. And then, the one that nobody talks about but should, he predicted the quantum problem. In a Bitcoin talk thread on June 10th, 2010, Satoshi wrote, SHA-256 is very strong. It's not like the incremental step from MD5 to SHA-1. It can last several decades unless there's some massive breakthrough attack. If SHA-256 became completely broken, I think we could come to some agreement about what the honest blockchain was before the trouble started, lock that in and continue from there with a new hash function. He then outlined in plain text exactly how the network could be migrated to a new cryptographic primitive via a coordinated soft fork. 15 years before NIST published its post-quantum cryptography standards in August 2024. Satoshi was in 2010 writing the migration plan for a problem that the United States federal government would not formally acknowledge until 2024, a decade and a half later. You see, the set of people in 2008 who were world-class cryptographers is small, probably a few hundred globally. The set who were also distributed system engineers capable of solving the double spend problem, which had defeated computer scientists for multiple decades, is much, much smaller, perhaps a few dozen. The set who were also Austrian school economists capable of designing a 131-year deflationary monetary policy, even smaller. By now we should be able to count them on a single hand. But it gets more extreme. The set who were also game theorists who could align incentives across a trustless, leaderless network for 16 years without a critical failure. The set who were also political philosophers capable of embedding a coherent critique of central banking into the foundational data of their own creation. The set who also forecasted quantum-resistant migration paths 15 years before NIST published its own post-quantum cryptography standards. And the set who could do all of that just mentioned with no visible learning curve, no failed prototypes, no public alphas, on the first try with a code so clean that Dan Kaminsky, the security researcher who in 2008 found the flaw that nearly broke the entire global internet, tried to hack Bitcoin and came back empty-handed, calling the code impenetrable, and who also had the psychological discipline to abandon the project, give up the credit, and leave $100 billion untouched in a wallet for 16 years. That intersection should be empty. It is empty, and yet it produced exactly one person. That is what the alien theory is actually saying. Not that Satoshi was from another planet, but that no human being in 2008 plausibly held all of this knowledge simultaneously. Even if it was an entire group of people, the Venn diagram has no center, and yet the work exists. This is what the time traveler theory is actually saying. Not that Satoshi physically traveled through time, that the foresight is too precise, that the 2008 timing, the 131-year schedule, the 2010 quantum migration plan, the prediction of the exact failure models the network would later face, these read less like guesses and more like memories, as if someone arrived already knowing the answers. Now, there are three plausible candidates for who Satoshi actually was, and none of them are comfortable. The first is the lone savant, A single human being who happened to combine every required field at world-class level simultaneously in total secrecy with the psychological constitution of a saint. Is it possible? Technically, yes. History does produce once-in-a-century polymaths. Newton invented calculus and rewrote physics in the same decade. Von Neumann made foundational contributions to quantum mechanics, game theory, and computer architecture simultaneously. But even von Neumann had colleagues, had correspondence, had a visible intellectual development that historians can trace across decades of academic output. Satoshi had none of that. No prior papers, no failed attempts, no learning curve, no mentor, no correspondence outside of the 18 months he was active. The lone savant hypothesis requires a genius so extreme that even von Neumann stops feeling like a useful comparison. The second is the cypherpunk collective. Beck, Dye, Szabo, Finney, and possibly others, working together under a shared pseudonym, each contributing their area of expertise. The combined Venn diagram suddenly has a center. This is the hypothesis that comes closest to being comfortable. It's the one I'd like to believe, because it keeps Satoshi human, but it has one fatal flaw that no one has ever answered properly. Every collective of more than 2 people in human history has eventually leaked. The Manhattan Project, the most tightly controlled secret operation in American history, involving thousands of scientists on a military discipline with active counterintelligence, leaked within years. Klaus Fuchs, the Rosenbergs, David Greenglass. The cypherpunk collective hypothesis requires perfect operational security across multiple people, sustained for over 16 years, with no leak, no deathbed confession, no accidentally revealing detail, no stylometric slip, across a group of people who were not under military discipline, who communicated digitally, and at least one of whom is now dead. Hal Finney died in 2014. He communicated through eye movements at the end. So if he was part of this collective, he took it with him with a level of discipline that exceeds anything ever documented in the history of human secrets. And the third, that's the one most Bitcoiners refuse to discuss. In 1996, the US National Security Agency published a paper titled How to Make a Mint, the Cryptography of Anonymous Electronic Cash. That paper described in broad strokes a system for digital money. The SHA-256 hashing algorithm at the heart of Bitcoin was designed by the NSA. Now, I'm not telling you the NSA built Bitcoin. I am telling you that 15 years of cypherpunks cannot rule it out, and the inability to rule this out is itself the data point. So the lone savant requires a once-in-a-century interdisciplinary genius with the temperament to disappear. The collective requires perfect operational security across multiple people for over a decade and a half. And the third option requires you to believe in something most Bitcoiners cannot stomach. Now pick one. This is why the alien and time travel theories exist. Not because anyone literally believes them, but because once you have ruled out the mundane explanations, the supernatural ones become the only honest way to describe the size of the gap between what should be possible and what actually happened. Okay, so I'm now going to argue something harder than anything I've said so far. The religion is not a side effect of Bitcoin's success. The religion is the reason for Bitcoin's success. Without the messianic absence, Bitcoin is just another altcoin with a clever consensus mechanism. With it, Bitcoin is something no other crypto asset on earth can compete with. And I want to be careful here because there are reasonable counter-arguments. You could call what I'm about to describe Lindy. The longer something has existed, the longer it is likely to continue existing. You could call it the network effect, where the first mover in any technology compounds advantages over time. You could call it path dependence, the historical accident that Bitcoin happened to be first. And each of these makes a real case. Each of them is part of the answer. But none of them, not a single one on their own, explain a $1.6 trillion market cap. Lindy applies to plenty of older crypto projects that died. Network effects apply to Friendster, Yahoo, and MySpace. Path dependence does not explain why nation states keep choosing Bitcoin and not the other 20,000 alternatives. There's one more thing, and it has nothing to do with the technology. Let's start with the legal mode. Every other major cryptocurrency has a founder you can subpoena. Ethereum has Vitalik Buterin. Solana has Anatoly Yakovenko. Cardano has Charles Hoskinson. When Gary Gensler's SEC went in the offensive against the crypto industry between 2021 and 2024, every project with a visible founder got hit. Lawsuits, Wells notices, forced settlements. Bitcoin did not get hit because there is no one to hit. Satoshi's absence is not just poetry, it is the most valuable legal architecture in the history of digital finance. You cannot serve a subpoena on a ghost. You cannot pressure a man who has not been seen in 14 years. You cannot extract a settlement from someone who has refused to claim $100 billion. The SEC's own framework for classifying a token as a security, the Howey test, depends on the existence of an identifiable common enterprise. Bitcoin has no common enterprise. It has no CEO, no foundation, no marketing department, no roadmap meetings. It is legally an orphan. Every other crypto founder envies this, and none of them can replicate it. The window closed in 2011 when Satoshi walked away. Now the credibility mode. There are 1.1 million Bitcoin in Satoshi's wallets. They have never moved. Compare this to literally any other monetary system. The Federal Reserve can print dollars, the European Central Bank can print euros, the Ethereum Foundation can and has changed Ethereum's monetary policy multiple times, including the transition from proof of work to proof of stake, including EIP 1559, including the elimination of issuance. In every fiat system and every other crypto system, there is someone who can change the rules, someone you have to trust to not abuse the power, someone whose incentives must be aligned with yours or you are at risk. In Bitcoin, that someone does not exist. The 21 million cap cannot be raised because there is no one to raise it. The halving schedule cannot be paused because there is no one to pause it. And the 1.1 million coins cannot be dumped because the person who owns them has, for 16 consecutive years, demonstrated that he will not touch them. This is what religious texts have that political documents do not. You cannot edit the Quran. You cannot patch the Torah. You cannot amend the Bhagavad Gita. The text is fixed because the author is unreachable, and the unreachability is the source of authority. Bitcoin is the only monetary system in human history whose foundational text cannot be amended, because the founder is gone and the believers will not allow it. That is religious property, not technical property. Now the theological mode, and this is the one almost nobody on Western crypto channels talks about. In 2018, Sheikh Mufti Muhammad Abu Bakr, a respected Islamic scholar, issued one of the first major fatwas declaring Bitcoin permissible under Sharia law. He called it halal. Since then, scholars across Indonesia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Malaysia have followed. The Securities Commission of Malaysia issued formal Sharia advisory guidance on digital assets in the years since. Multiple Gulf states have approved Sharia-compliant Bitcoin investment products. Now, the reasoning for this is theological, and it's worth understanding. Islamic finance prohibits riba, that's interest or any return generated without productive work. It prohibits gharar, that's excessive uncertainty about what is actually being transacted. And it prohibits investments in assets whose underlying business is haram, like alcohol, gambling, or weapons. Bitcoin has no riba. There is no interest payment to anyone. The block reward is compensation for actual computational work, the most literal form of productive labor a digital asset can offer. Bitcoin has no gharar. The supply schedule is fixed and transparent. Every participant knows exactly how many coins exist, exactly when the next will be issued, and exactly when the last will be mined. And Bitcoin has no underlying haram business. It is, in Islamic terms, just money, comparable to the Prophet's own preference for gold and silver as sound currency. Now compare this to almost every other crypto asset. Ethereum staking yields look like riba, passive return without productive work. Most DeFi protocols are riddled with gharar, derivatives, leveraged farming, complex synthetic exposures, and so on. Stablecoins backed by US treasuries are theologically contaminated because their backing generates interest. So the entire altcoin landscape is, by the most common readings of Sharia, problematic. Bitcoin almost uniquely threads the needle. Now this means that roughly 2 billion Muslims globally now have a religious framework that permits Bitcoin specifically and rejects most of its competitors. And here's the parallel you would expect. The same is increasingly true in Christian theology. Bitcoin maximalists like Jimmy Song frame Bitcoin in explicitly Christian moral terms, contrasting fiat seigniorage with biblical condemnations of debased currency. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight, writes the author of Proverbs 11:1. For 2 millennia, that verse was applied to merchants who tampered with scales. Bitcoiners apply to central banks who tamper with money. The structural point is this: Bitcoin is the only monetary asset in human history that has been independently validated as religiously acceptable by multiple major world religions, while its closest competitors are theologically suspect across those same religions. That is not a coincidence. That is a moat. A 2 billion person moat in the Islamic world, a 2 billion person moat in the Christian world, and the moats reinforce each other because the same properties that make Bitcoin halal also make it morally legible to Christians worried about fiat debasement. No other digital asset can replicate this. The window to launch a halal Ethereum or Christian-compatible Solana closed years ago because the scholars have already ruled on the underlying mechanics, and the mechanics of every other major chain failed the test. The theological moat is not separate from the legal moat or the credibility moat. It is downstream of the same property, the absence of a founder, the absence of dilution, the absence of someone who can change the rules. Religion does not describe Bitcoin's user base. Religion describes Bitcoin's addressable market. And now the price. Bitcoin trades at a market cap of $1.6 trillion. The next largest cryptocurrency, Ethereum, trades at less than a fifth of that. In raw technical terms, this makes no sense. Bitcoin is slower than Ethereum, less programmable, less flexible, less useful for the vast majority of crypto applications. Dozens of newer networks have higher throughput, lower fees, and richer feature sets. So why does Bitcoin trade at the 5-to-1 premium to the closest competitor? Lindy gets you part of the way there, sure. Network effects get you part of the way there as well, and path dependence gets you part of the way there as well. But the rest is faith, Schelling point consensus, religious gravity. Bitcoin holders do not hold because the technology is the best. They hold because the story is the best. The story of the anonymous founder, the story of the prophecies fulfilled, the story of the $100 billion left untouched, the story that no other crypto asset can ever replicate because the conditions that produced it cannot be recreated. The hodl meme, hold on for dear life. That's not a trading strategy, it is a religious practice. It is a monastic discipline. It is the willingness to endure an 80% drawdown without selling because you believe in something larger than the price. Every other crypto investor sells in a bear market because they are investors. Bitcoin investors hold because they are believers. And that is the big difference. That is why central banks are starting to buy Bitcoin and not Bitcoin Cash, why El Salvador chose Bitcoin and not Solana, why BlackRock built an ETF for Bitcoin first, not because the technology is superior, because the theology is superior. Bitcoin has a property no other digital asset has, and no other digital asset can ever acquire. An unfindable founder, an untouched fortune, a fulfilled prophetic record, religious validations across multiple faiths, and a community of believers who would rather die than dilute the supply. Every other crypto asset has founders who might cash out, and Bitcoin has a messiah who refuses to. There's one more important detail we have to cover, and it is the part that makes the religious structure real for me. Not as an academic thesis, but as a thing happening to actual human beings right now. Hal Finney is still in that tank in Scottsdale, Arizona. His body has been preserved at minus 196 degrees Celsius for almost 12 years. The Alcor Life Extension Foundation, which holds him, is partially funded directly and indirectly by the very Bitcoin network he helped create. Every halving that runs on schedule extends the runway of his preservation. Every prophecy that fulfills makes his resurrection more economically possible. And every dollar Bitcoin appreciates is a dollar that in some real accounting sense funds the chance that he might actually come back. So he is, in a way, no other believer can claim, betting his actual body on the religion. This is what faith looks like when the founder is gone, when the prophecies keep coming true, and when the believers refuse to let the story end. This is why the academics at Berkeley and Oxford are not making a metaphorical claim. They are describing the load-bearing structural feature that produces the market cap. So the religion is not on top of Bitcoin. The religion is Bitcoin. Take away Satoshi's absence and you have a centralized network. Take away the untouched coins and you have a founder who can dump. Take away the prophecies and you have a coin without a story. Take away the disciples and you have no transmission line for faith. Take away the theological validation and you lose 4 billion potential believers across 2 of the world's largest faiths. Take away Hal Finney in that tank and you lose the proof that real people are willing to wager their lives on what's left. What remains if you strip the religion away is not Bitcoin, it is just code. So why does this religion exist? Because the mystery itself is the mechanism. A god you can prove is not a god, he's just a man. Satoshi's power comes from his absence. The unknowability is the divinity. If we knew his name tomorrow, if he walked on stage at a Bitcoin conference and signed a transaction from the Genesis block, Bitcoin would lose something irreplaceable. Faith requires a gap. And the gap in this case is the entire identity of the man or woman or alien or NSA, CIA time traveler who wrote the scripture. Every 4 years, on schedule, Bitcoin supply is cut in half, and on every note on earth, that London Times headline remains. The believers hold, the prophecies fulfill, and in a quiet building in Scottsdale, Arizona, a man is waiting. So was Satoshi even human? We genuinely don't know. And that is exactly the point. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. This is DC, signing